This episode today is a bit different than our normal content, but it came after a conversation we had as a team after Drew and I had seen a headline in February of this year that said the identity of Jack the Ripper was now known. After we saw this headline, we didn't understand how this wasn't bigger news. So Drew started digging in, and boy, did he dig. Here's what he found.
Hello and welcome to Invisible Tears. I'm Jane, host of Invisible Tears, and I am with my co-host Amanda and Drew today. How you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing great. Thanks, Jane. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I am doing good. So, Drew, you did an enormous amount of research. We're going to talk about Jack the Ripper. And Jack the Ripper murders. You have done an amazing job with the research that you have done. So why don't we dive right into it?
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of you probably heard something earlier in 2025. It was around like February. News came out that Jack the Ripper had been identified via DNA. And it caught me with how little news this was getting. I was like, oh, they solved the most infamous case and nobody's talking about it. Wasn't getting a lot of coverage. I was just like, what's going on here? I figured this would have been one of those cases. Once there was a name attached to it, boom. It's just going to take off. Everybody's going to be talking about it again. Finally, the first serial killer case has finally been solved. So
yeah, it should have blown up in media and never did.
So kind of did a little bit of digging as to what was the evidence for it and why is it not being considered slam dunk shut, as some of the news reports were saying. So I did kind of want to give a little bit of an overview of Jack the Ripper, what made it so kind of popular at the time, and why does it still hold people's attention even to this day. So the Jack the Ripper murders, otherwise known as possibly the Whitechapel murders, the Leather Apron murders, that went by a couple different names throughout the years, but it's been known famously as the Jack the Ripper's murders. They occurred in East London starting in 1888. The number of victims range anywhere from 4 to 11 women. Authorities can't be for certain, but they do know that between April 1888 and February of 1891, 11 women were killed on the East End, and these were dubbed the Whitechapel murders. Now, 5 of these women are believed to have been done by the same person that has been identified as Jack the Ripper. And all of these murders did occur between a 9-week period from late August to early November of 1888. So now the other 7 murders, it's just women within the same circumstances died. Some of them were kind of along the same lines of stabbings, eviscerations, but none were able to be positively linked to this one perpetrator. So the first victim was Polly Nichols. She was found mutilated on August 31st, 1888. So here's a little bit of a timeline of her night. She was last seen at 2:30 a.m. by a friend who stated she saw that she was very drunk and was set out to make some money for lodging that night. She was a prostitute, and at the time, a lot of the women were just trying to make some quick money to get a room for the night in a local lodge. At the time, Polly was an alcoholic and was resorting to prostitution. On the evening of the 30th, she had made enough money to cover lodging, but she had spent the money on alcohol. As she went back out at 2:30 in the morning on the 31st to make some lodging money, it was the last time she was seen alive. Her body was discovered at 3:45 a.m. next to a gateway in Bucks Row. She was nearly decapitated and was eviscerated.
Ooh.
The second victim was Annie Chapman. At about 1:45 a.m. on September 7th, 1888, Annie was at Crossingham's lodging house feeling ill. After she was unable to pay for a room, she was escorted out of the building. She told the innkeeper to keep her room open, she would be back shortly with some lodging money. Annie was known to have sold crochets, flowers, and matches, but would occasionally prostitute herself if she needed the money. She was last seen alive at 5:30 a.m., walking with a man on Hanbury Street. 30 minutes later, her body was found mutilated behind the house of an elderly resident named John Davis. On September 24th, the first letter suspected from Jack the Ripper was received by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Charles Warren. Now, that's the one thing that makes Jack the Ripper kind of different from the other ones, was the communication with authorities, with newspapers and such. So this first letter stated, "Dear Sir, I do wish to give myself up. I am in misery with nightmare. I am the man who committed all these murders in the last 6 months. I am a horse slaughterer. I have found the woman I wanted, that is Chapman, and I done what I called slaughtered her, but if anyone comes, I will surrender." Including were drawings of a coffin and a knife. And the next to the knife it said, "This is the knife that I done these murders with. It is a small handle with a large long blade, sharp both sides." The Dear Boss letter was the next letter to be received. It was received by the Central News Agency on September 27th. They weren't sure about the seriousness of this letter, but they turned it over to police on September 29th. The letter read, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I am down on whores and I shan't quit ripping them till I get good buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope. Ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My nice, so nice and sharp, I want to give it work right away if I get a chance. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha."
Oh
Now,
my
police
God.
were initially skeptical that this was a hoax until the events that followed the night that made them reevaluate this letter.
Oh my God.
Jesus, that's morbid. Holy crap.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
September 29th, 1888 saw what is known as the double murder of the Jack the Ripper case. The first murder victim of that night, Elizabeth Stride. Elizabeth finished up working. She was cleaning the lodging house she was staying at when she went out for some drinks. At 12:45 a.m. on the 30th of September, a man known as Israel Schwartz saw what he thought was a domestic argument happening between a man and a woman who he later identified as Elizabeth. Around 1 a.m., her body was found by Louis Deemschotz, who was returning home on his pony and cart. Unlike the other victims, Elizabeth's throat was the only thing cut. Authorities believe the sound of the pony and the cart coming down the road startled the attacker. Shortly after this, the second victim, Catherine Eddowes, was murdered. On September 30th, she had been arrested for public drunkenness and held in protective custody until around midnight when she was deemed sober enough to leave. At 1:35 a.m., 3 men saw Catherine walking with a man at the entrance of Mitre Square. 10 minutes later, police constable Alfred Watkins was walking his beat in Mitre Square when he came across her body. She had her throat cut, was disemboweled, along with a deep V cut into her cheeks and eyelids. The attacker removed her uterus and left kidney.
Wow. Brutal.
Crap.
So the police at this time, looking at that Dear Boss letter and these double murders, they decided on October 1st to release the Dear Boss letter to the public, which exploded the public's interest in these cases.
One thing I noticed, they didn't mention the ears being cut off either one of those 2 victims, like he had mentioned in the letter.
That's addressed right here. On the morning of October 1st, the Central News Agency received a postcard believed to have been from Jack the Ripper. That said, I was not coddling dear old boss when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit. Couldn't finish straight off. Had not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper. At the time, some experts believed that these letters were a hoax from somebody working in the newspaper industry, as the postcard was sent to the Central News, which is best way to describe it as the AP of today, the Associated Press. This meant that the suspected killer that is sending this postcard to the Central News, it'd be sent to every news organization and therefore papers. Experts believe that a random person would have sent this postcard to a particular newspaper that they were aware of, but that the Central News would not have been a first choice for anyone outside of working within the news industry. On October 16th, George Lusk, the president of the Mile High Vigilante Committee, received the letter known as the From Hell letter. Starts off, From Hell. Mr. Lusk, sore. I sent you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you to tether piece. I fried and ate it. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, Catch Me If You Can, Mr. Lusk. George Lusk initially thought this was a prank and the kidney was from a farm animal. He brought the piece of kidney to two different doctors who determined it was human kidney. One, Dr. Oppenshaw, thought it was a human left kidney, possibly from a female who was a heavy drinker. He did believe that along with the writing in the letter that it was a prank from a medical student, and the police were actually thinking the same thing at the time. There's a lot going on here.
Oh my God.
The fifth victim is Mary Kelly. During October of 1888, Mary had fallen behind on her rent and had resorted to prostitution to try to make ends meet. On the 9th of November, Mary was last seen by a couple of people. One individual being George Hutchinson, who saw her at about 2 a.m. when she asked him to lend her 6 pence, but he unfortunately didn't have the money. She went on her way, and George witnessed a man coming up to her from the opposite direction, put his arm around Mary, and whisper something to her, in which they both laughed and walked away along Commercial Street. At around 4 a.m., 2 neighbors heard a faint cry of murder, but didn't think much of it given their location. At 10:45 in the morning of the 9th, the landlord, John McCarthy, sent his employee, Thomas Boyer, to collect the rent that Mary owed for that night. At the time, he was unable to get into her locked room, and when he looked through the windows, he noticed a large amount of blood within the room. He notified his boss, McCarthy, who went to the room to confirm what was being told to him. At this time, police were immediately called in. However, they did not enter the room until about 1:30 in the afternoon, with the hopes that the bloodhounds would be able to use a track where the suspect went after leaving the room. Once inside, the horrors were seen. This was the most brutal attack of all the victims, as Mary's body was almost completely dissected. Photos were taken of the body, and the images still exist to this day, and it's actually, some believe, some of the earliest crime scene photos taken at the time. A review of the crime scene lasted until 4 o'clock that afternoon. By this time, thousands had come out to view her as her coffin was being transported from the morgue to the cemetery where she was laid to rest. Although there were other murders associated with Jack the Ripper, Mary's is believed to be his last victim. The true brutality of her murder did shine light on the bad living conditions for the poor sector of society, and some believe this kicked off the assistance to the less fortunate in England. So it was one of those where there was a lot of bad happening. Those that were in power within England realized there was a large subset of the population that just could not really protect themselves, who were living in filth, alcoholism, prostitution, and they really realized like something did have to change at this point. Now, the interesting aspect, in my opinion, of this are the letters that were sent to authorities, newspapers, and others. In total, there were over 700 letters sent to various sources, with most of them either being letters offering how to apprehend the suspect or prank letters either admitting to or making claim against someone that they had a grudge against. And this also does go to show about the fascination of serial killers is not a recent thing, as a lot of people, expect to believe. When these murders happened, in England in the late 1800s, onlookers came out of nowhere to witness the crime scenes, to witness the funerals. So it did sort of kick off that serial killer craze even back then. So those are the crimes and some of the letters. And there is definitely a lot more detail out there. We'll put some links in. There's a great website that has a full timeline, absolutely all the information you could ever need to find on this case. But that brings us to the information that came about in February of 2025 with an identification
Fast
of
forward.
Jack the Ripper. So now there were a number of suspects at the time and throughout the years. But the suspect that we're going to be talking about today is Aaron Kosminski. Now, at the time, he was a very strong suspect by authorities and other high-ranking officers that did work the case. He was a top suspect. Now, at the time, back in the late 1800s, there were witnesses that were willing to identify Kosminski as the murderer, but they were unwilling to provide evidence due to Kosminski's religion being Judaism. There was a lot of Jewish immigrants at the time moving into the East End of London. And when these murders happened, it did create a lot of anti-Semitism in the area. It had to have been a Jewish person that committed these murders because nothing like this happened before. And therefore, other Jewish people were very reluctant to kind of pour gas onto that by putting forward that it could have been a Jewish person.
Yeah. Wow.
So Aaron Kosminski, there's not a whole lot that is known about him, but we do know that he was a Polish-born immigrant who moved to London between 1871 and 1873. There's not a lot known about him, apart from him being admitted to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum in 1891.
Lunatic?
Couple
Asylum.
of years after the murders.
So what was that? Was that a church or a hospital or mental hospital?
Mental hospital. So he suffered from severe mental illness, and he was first admitted to help on July 12th, 1890, at the Mile End Old Town Workhouse, where he stayed for 3 days. He was also readmitted in early 1891. And by this time, he was certified insane on February 7th, 1891, where he spent the next 3 years at the Colney House before he was transferred to Leavesden Asylum, where he spent the remaining 25 years of his life, where he passed away on March 24th, 1919. Many believe that he suffered from schizophrenia.
That was going to be my question. Like, oh, all these readmittance and then like such a long stay. What did we think he had? But yeah, thank you. Schizophrenia. Okay.
And how old would he have been at the time of these murders?
They don't
Do we
know
know?
because there's no identification on when he was possibly born. The only thing that we can see is that when he had moved to London in the early 1870s. Actually, yeah, to be honest, there's no mention of his age at any point during either the murders or his stays within the mental institution. So we can't actually even backtrack and saying, okay, if he was 40 years old when he died in 1919, that would make him born, yada, yada. But we don't have that.
No age at all.
Yep. So with Kosminski's identification, we come forward to the DNA analysis. So in February 2025, English historian Russell Edwards came forward saying he found DNA from one of the crime scenes, and the DNA analysis pointed to Aaron Kosminski. So how this happened was a shawl that was in Catherine Eddowes' possession had a semen sample as well as some blood from hers. So this shawl was originally purchased by Russell Edwards back in 2007. Purchased it knowing that this was a shawl that was owned by Catherine Eddowes, was in her room at the time of the murders. The DNA was first examined by Dr. Jari Louhelainen from Liverpool John Moores University. So the DNA was conducted back in 2007, but the information didn't want to be released. As Dr. Jari said, he wanted to wait for the fuss to die down before submitting the results. In my opinion, that's kind of suspect. Kind of makes you go, why would you sit on this stuff if you really had it for all this time?
Yeah.
And
the private purchase of the private purchase of the shawl too. Like that's
that just seemed weird to me as well.
So back in 2014, there was actually a book titled Naming Jack the Ripper that was published, naming Aaron Kosminski as the perpetrator by using these unpublished results. So what the results were is there was a blood spot that was matched to descendants of Catherine Eddowes, and the semen sample was able to be matched to descendants of Aaron Kosminski.
So what did
So-
they do? Exhume his body to get DNA, or how did they do
No,
that?
there is a relative of him that's actually still alive that was kind of at the forefront of this testing. It was, oh God, I can't remember. It's like a great-great-granddaughter.
Oh.
But they were able to say it was lineage. So that way they were able to do the testing. So what they did is they took lineage from Aaron Kosminski and also Catherine Eddowes and tested the DNA samples of those living descendants to these samples that were found on this shawl.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And now back to our episode.
Now we get into what was the DNA that was found that was used for the testing. So when we're looking at the semen sample that was used to tie Kosminski to the crime, I want to identify that it was actually mitochondrial DNA that was used for this testing. Now, when you look at a cell, there's actually two different forms of DNA that are within the cell. Best way for me to explain it kind of in layman terms is if you look at, say, a plum, okay? The pit of the plum is known as the nuclear DNA. The fruit of the plum, that is the mitochondrial DNA. If that helps you visualize just a DNA cell or, a source of trying to get DNA, those are the two different parts in which you can actually get samples to test against.
Yep, it does.
Does that make sense?
Oh,
Able to
total
visualize
sense.
it? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much.
Now, nuclear DNA is the chromosomes within the nucleus of the cell. The nucleated cells contain 23 pairs of chromosomes, 46 in total, which is made up of half being inherited from the mother and half being inherited from the father. So nuclear DNA is where you're able to get the complete DNA profile of both your mother and your father's to get a complete lineage of who is this exact person. That can only be made up of by one person. Now, for the sperm samples, sperm are only contain about 23 chromosomes at a time. So multiple sperm samples are going to have to be gathered in order to build the complete 46 chromosome profile to be able to get a full profile. You won't be able to get that out of just one sperm cell. You'll need multiple to actually build that out. Now, when looking at the size of the data from mitochondrial to nuclear within this particular cell, nuclear DNA will have about 1,000th part of its information per cell, while mitochondrial DNA will have 1,000th parts per cell. So if you were to be looking at a sample trying to find mitochondrial and nuclear, you're going to have a lot more stuff to work with if you're looking at just the mitochondrial DNA versus the nuclear. So nuclear DNA shows the DNA from both the mothers and the fathers, as I described. Mitochondrial DNA, on the other hand, only shows DNA from the mother's side, from the maternal side. So we know with this research that it was mitochondrial DNA from the semen sample that was used to identify Kosminski. However, there are a lot of shortcomings because what this really identifies is that it could just possibly be somebody within the Kosminski family name in which this mitochondrial DNA matches. So we actually did see this in a case within New Hampshire, and you guys might have to help me refresh my mind, where there was DNA analysis that was brought forward. However, police only focused on one surname, and they had discounted all the other surnames. And in fact, McLaughlin was one of the surnames because we all kind of got a chuckle out of that.
Yeah,
So
it
that's
was
kind
Melissa
of
Tremblay.
Melissa.
It was Melissa Trembley's trial. Yep.
Perfect. Yep. So that's why mitochondrial DNA is not used for forensic testing. It's used when looking at very old, degraded sample cells with which nuclear DNA no longer exists. Mitochondrial is the only way. And that's able to help you kind of narrow the gap a little bit as far as the pool of people it could have come from. However, in the court systems, mitochondrial DNA is never used to point a finger at somebody. It's always used to discount somebody.
Oh.
Nuclear DNA is the only one that's actually used to positively identify a person. Now, in cases like this with Jack the Ripper, there's not going to be any nuclear DNA available. It really is just going to be mitochondrial. So this really is the best evidence that they do have to test off of. However, there are a lot of could it be this, could it be that type of situation when you actually do look at that results. Because with it being mitochondrial DNA, especially within a very heavy immigrant part, they're really able to just say, well, actually, it could very well just be somebody of Polish Jewish descent that this DNA actually ties to. That happens to be, that Aaron Kosminski happens to be a part of the family tree. Now, with him being a strong suspect at the time, and you do have this mitochondrial DNA, it sort of is adding up to, okay, if it's not him, who else could it be? However, there has been no proof that the shawl was actually even a part of the crime scene. It was in her room, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's part of the crime scene, in my opinion. It was just a piece of fabric that was owned. As far as when the semen sample and the blood got on it, there's no clear identifiers as to when that timing happened. Because of her being a prostitute, could that semen come from Aaron Kosminski, but at a much earlier time and was just sitting there? So we don't really know that much.
I did not realize, Drew, that sperm DNA lasted that long.
Actually, yeah, I didn't even think to actually look at how long that would be to break down, but
yeah.
The other aspect of Aaron Kosminski that makes me go, is it really him or is it not, is by all accounts, Kosminski with his mental health issues, he was, I don't know how the best word to put this, but batshit crazy. He would never eat food that was given to him, but he would eat food out of gutters. He never bathed, spoke just gibberish. And the fact that, by all accounts, many witnesses mentioned that his lack of bathing, his dirtiness. And when you look at these cases and these murders, in the evisceration, the absolute bloodbath that they were, how did he not get covered in blood? And if he wasn't a bather, did this get washed off? Was the mud and the shit so overwhelming that it covered up that blood smell? I don't know. So that was one thing when I read that about his activities and going, okay, if he was so unhygienic, how would he be able to actually still kind of walk around society covered in blood from all of these murders?
Yeah, and nobody noticed.
Yeah.
That's suspicious.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then why wait 18 years to publish the findings of the DNA? Yeah. If you had it all back then, and if the reason is because you wanted the craze to die down, no, that'd be the time when you would actually want to release the information, is when everybody's talking about this case. Right. I don't know why waiting until a slow news cycle to try to get it out there, sitting on it for so many years. So that's definitely a little bit of a red flag for me, going, if you really knew the identification, you want to get this out there, this would have been put out, straightforward. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, it was stated that the DNA analysis was put into a peer-reviewed journal. And it was, however, not all the data was actually put in there. It was a very color-coded graph explaining how this DNA was matching up with this one. But there was no DNA sequences put out there. There was none of that information. In the rationale from the journalist, the people that are releasing the information, is they didn't want to release genetic details of living people that they were used to test it. However, those that would argue is, well, then you're not allowing us to actually do the math and the science and the comparing of the data to actually prove what you're saying is correct. So without that information actually being released, nobody's been able to actually say you're right or you're wrong, because just cannot see that information.
Yeah. And anybody that's a part of the science community knows and understands. I mean, I'm sure that process actually occurs more internally within the science community too. But like when you have some sort of theory, it does have to be actually tested by your other peers, almost like a peer review. Again, that doesn't have to be public information. It can be completely confidential, but it does actually have to be tested by other scientists to conclude the same thing. And like until you have that, you just have a hypothesis. It hasn't been proven.
Yeah, so I'd be interested if other DNA genealogists would be able to actually look at the data and would be able to confirm without a, beyond a reasonable doubt, actually, yes, this DNA that was found along with this blood splatter, it ties to these descendants. It truly is the best chance of answering it. But if you're looking at it from the testing perspective and going, they grabbed a DNA sample from Catherine Eddowes' lineage and a DNA sample from Aaron Kosminski's lineage, and then tested only those two samples to what they found on the shawl. And if they found something that matches, they're like, oh, okay, good, perfect. We don't have to go any further. So I just want to know how much other comparing they did to other lineages from that area of East London at the time to see, are you seeing other matches to other families that mitochondrial DNA lines up with.
So has London officially considered this case solved and closed?
No. To be honest, it sounds like by all accounts, there's just not enough information yet. There's not enough details to actually say that this is a closed case, which is why I think it wasn't such a big deal when the news broke in early February. That's why we weren't hearing every news organization talking about Jack the Ripper case being solved. Because I think a lot of people looked at it the same way that, that I did, going, okay, this is interesting, but it's not a slam dunk. It doesn't close the case. Is it one of those where, do I also believe that it'll never be solved? Yes. I don't think they'll ever be solved. I think this is probably the closest that we will ever get to an answer into who Jack the Ripper was. Going, okay, yep, all signs are pointing to it was Aaron Kosminski. He was a suspect at the time. There is this DNA analysis, although it lacks a lot of details, it is the closest thing that we actually do have to an answer. It is one of those cases that, unfortunately, I don't think there will ever be a resolution. This might be the closest that we ever get to it, because that's the other thing, is what other evidences are out there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is there other evidence out there? Police reports. What was in some of the police reports and witnesses? Did they positively identify him? And still a lot of unanswered questions.
There's a lot of witness accounts. There is a lot of the authorities at the time were actually pretty open with what they thought. There's been a lot of the cops that worked on the case at the time actually did come out and write like memoirs about it, kind of talked about it. So there is a lot of information from the perspective of the authorities with who they thought it was. And even them, you get 4 guys working on a case, and 2 would think it was this person, 1 would think it was this person, the other one would think it was this person. So there is a lot of that information out there. We'll definitely put some of the links of where I found this information in the show notes if you want to go check it out. This one website even has the crime scene photos that you can see, some of the autopsy information. So it is very in-depth. To be honest, this is one of those cases where I think the public knows just as much as the authorities know. I don't think they held anything back. And in fact, all of the letters were released to the public. Now, it did also drum up a lot of hoaxes, a lot of pranks, a lot of people just wanting to mess with authorities, wanting to take care of grudges that they might have. But they were actually pretty forward with releasing a lot of that information, especially if they felt that it was pertinent to the cases.
They ever find the knife?
No.
Wow.
Nope, never able to find the knife. And this is even people think it could have been anybody from this Kosminski, who was a schizophrenic, homeless person, to was it a doctor? Was it a member of the royal family? Was it a butcher? There's a lot of theories, but no clear, concise answers, which is very interesting for it being the first case.
Now, all the murders stopped when he went into that asylum, right?
Yep, the last murder that can be associated with Jack the Ripper was actually in 1888, and he wasn't put into the insane asylum until 1891. And they don't know why it stopped. Just it really did all of a sudden just stop. So they're trying to figure out, Jane, kind of like your case. Did he go to jail? Did he die? Did he move elsewhere? And then, of course, there is also the theories, which I think have now been completely debunked, which is kind of good, was that it was H.H. Holmes, the guy from America. And luckily that has been discounted. He was a fellow New Hampshire resident. Lovely.
It's crazy.
But yeah, I think that's been discounted over the years. A lot of people definitely looked into that and were like, okay, there's a lot of similarities between H.H. Holmes and Jack the Ripper. Were they the same person? I think that's been able to be proven, that the timelines don't add up exactly.
Interesting. Them were some brutal ass murders.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
And the crime scene photos are black and white, kind of grainy, but you can make out some of them, and some of them are pretty brutal.
Any evidence of rape? Do you ever remember reading anything about that?
No, but with them all being prostitutes and the level of evisceration and decapitate, just the brutality that was brought along the bodies, is they weren't able to show it. And I don't know if that testing was actually done. Yeah. I don't know if they would have been able to actually prove rape at the time. But that's the other thing, is actually I don't think there was any rape involved because of the short period of time in which these women were like last seen alive and then their bodies found murdered. They were such quick succession that it doesn't make you sort of question. It really does seem like it was just a slasher, if you would.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for doing digging on the victims as well. So often it's so heard, obviously Jack the Ripper, everybody knows Jack the Ripper, first known, serial killer, that sort of thing. But I personally had never actually heard the names or any sort of detail of any of the victims.
And I'm sure a lot of our listeners out there do know this case. They probably know it very well, probably even better than the overview that I gave. But we did want to touch on the DNA aspect of this case. And okay, we saw that it was solved, but why is people not talking about it as it being solved? And that sort of sent me down the rabbit hole of, it's mitochondrial DNA versus nuclear DNA. Okay, well, what the hell does that mean? So then it's, okay, let me do a deep dive onto what is the difference, what makes it up, why is one used with testing, why is it one not used for testing? So it was able to send me down that sort of rabbit hole. So get a little bit better understanding of that. Because I think before even the Melissa Tremblay case, DNA was DNA.
Right.
Yeah.
If you find DNA, you're good to go. Well, there's definitely more to the story as we're learning as testing gets better on DNA too, realizing that it can actually go from that top layer down to an even lower level layer to get more information. So it was kind of good to educate myself with that aspect of being able to understand nuclear DNA is really the only answer to positively identify one particular person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. That's something new I didn't know. I thought DNA was DNA.
Yep, me too.
That's good info. Well, thank you for educating us there.
Yep, so that's a little bit update on the Jack the Ripper and the DNA analysis that came out of it. I don't know. You let me know. What do you think? Do you think that this is actually good enough to be like, okay, yes, we're not going to find a better suspect than Aaron Kosminski? Do we all, as a society, say, you know what? This is probably our best bet at identifying him? Or do we just say, nope, there's still not quite enough to make it that slam dunk beyond a reasonable doubt? Do we keep on doing research? What are people going to be researching? I don't know. What else is there left to test? Who the hell knows? Apparently, there might be items still in other people's private collections, as this shawl was in a private collection and has been since the DNA was tested. So, are there other pieces out there like that?
I'm still just so shocked that a sperm specimen existed that long. At 2007, so going from 1888 to 2007 when he purchased it. Like, how does that still exist on there?
Yeah. Yeah, because I always thought sperm broke down a lot faster than DNA from blood or hair or anything like that.
So that's where nuclear DNA does break down much, much faster than mitochondrial. Mitochondrial will stay around for a long time. In fact, when they do testing on mummies, stuff that's thousands of years old, when they find the DNA, that's mitochondrial DNA that they're finding.
Okay. Yep.
Oh,
that makes sense. That makes sense. And great point. The definite distinct difference there, right? So that's why the DNA was still present there. Interesting.
Yeah, I would love to know what people think about this. What's your opinion?
And did I do a good enough job of explaining the difference between nuclear and mitochondrial? If it
You
still doesn't
did.
make sense, reach out. I'll try to reword it a little bit, but it's the best way that I could try to visualize and try to get that information across. So
I think you did, especially with the visual of the plum. But I'm a super visual person.
Yeah. If I could understand it, almost anybody else could understand it. I thought you did a great job explaining, really breaking it all down. Makes so much sense. Yeah, you did a great job. And yeah, like Amanda said, that plum, I can visualize with the plum.
yeah, when I was trying to think of when I was trying to visualize it, I was like, what's the best way to try to get it across to everybody so everybody can kind of be able to visualize one item to be able to visually show nuclear and mitochondrial within the same cell itself. And this is how you can extract it. It's why this one breaks down much quicker than this one.
It makes sense. Anything else, Joe?
Nope, that is all on the Jack the Ripper DNA updates.
Thank you so much. You did a fabulous job with all your research. That was really awesome. I kind of went along with you. I did not know this information ahead of time, and it was great. It was very informative. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, it was definitely one of those where as I was digging into it, I was like, oh, this actually helps explain these other cases, the Melissa Tremblay case in particular, going,
Yeah.
Okay, now I have a better understanding as to why that DNA was kicked out of the case or not used in the case in particular. So,
Yeah, unfortunately. Thank you for listening to Invisible Tears. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and until next time, have a great day.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Invisible Tears. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast to hear all future episodes. Click into our link tree too in the episode description to find and follow us on all our social medias. And it also links to our website, invisible-tears.com, where you can keep current on any events that may be coming up, read more about Jane and the team, and read more about all the Connecticut River Valley unsolved cases. Evil may exist in this world, but we will not let it win. See you next episode.